Hey everyone, how's it going? Good to see you all. We're here for what is our, I think, our 24th design journal. So lots going on. Let me start by saying that we usually start out by telling you a little bit about gaming. Gaming didn't happen the last week. There's been a bit of COVID going around here. And so unfortunately, we weren't able to game last week. And so it's a bummer. Always bums us out when we can't game, but that's what happens sometimes. To be fair, generally the people who were healthy were gaming, but the people who had COVID weren't, obviously. So that was a kind of a bummer, but it's that time of year. We're probably going to see a whole lot more of it. Good evening to Heath and to Gary D20, to all you folks out there. I usually start with our mail call, and I start with the things I want to share. Nothing came in the mail this week. It was a super sad week. So instead, I'm just going to show you something, a little show and tell. I mean, who didn't love show and tell in school, right? Here we go. This is a very special tennis ball. It is a tennis ball that is signed by all the best American gladiators. It was fired from the American Gladiator tennis ball gun, ricocheted off of a gladiator, and flew into the stands of the Pontiac Silverdome when I was at the Silverdome, I guess it was, when I was a teen and we went and saw the American Gladiators live. This is one of my prized possessions, signed by all of them at the end, Laser and all the others. So if you ever watched American Gladiators, you'll know what I'm talking about. The joy of watching people bash each other in the head with padded weapons, kind of like, some ska events. But anyway, so that's enough show and tell for tonight. We've got a lot to talk about. Our focus is going to be the new playtest rules. That's all I'm going to show you tonight. Before I do, though, I do want to share one thing from a friend of ours, Sarah Lynch. Sarah Lynch Thomason is someone who has written some amazing music. She's like an expert when it comes to folk music. She actually wrote a song for the World of Aetaltis, which if you look at our main page on YouTube, it's right there and you can watch it. It's a song that's actually written about the dwarves, and it's a lament for the loss of their homeland. She's incredibly talented, and she's got this event coming up. So if you just go to sarosings.com, you can find her. But I just want to tell folks about it because she's an awesome person and she does awesome stuff and she's super talented. And she even writes role-playing game music. So how can you go wrong? But I just wanted to share that. We'll post more of that later somewhere else where you guys can find it and post it online. But very cool thing coming up. And again, if you haven't done it, go to our channel on YouTube, the Mechanical Muse channel, and watch her video because it's amazing, the song that she wrote for the World of Aetaltis. All right, enough of that. You guys want to hear about Cool Name Goes Here, and so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. This has been a chore getting to this point, but we made it. The final document now is roughly 20 pages long, about 11,000 words. I mean, it's a small book in its own right already, and this is just the play test for the core rules. So it's looking like we're gonna have some very cool stuff for everyone when this is all said and done. So let me start. I'm just gonna go ahead and we're gonna dive straight into it. All right. Let's take a look here. First off, well, we did add something new to the front. Look, we made a cover page. Isn't that fancy? So you got yourself a cover page for the playtest. But we have that first. And as we go through it, we start out by talking again about what playtests are like, what we're doing with the playtest. I showed you some of this last week, but we're going to go through it a little bit more this week. Some of you guys have heard some of this before, and I apologize, but this is a good chance for someone who doesn't know about what we're working on to find out more about it and to sort of learn what some of these rules are like. This is a way for you to learn some of the rules without having to read through the document right away. And so this is hopefully going to help you guys sort of sort out how the rules work and how you can use them in your own game and sort of give you some of the insight into what we were thinking as we put this together. I've also been spending tons of time rereading all your posts and some of your new combat posts on the Discord server. The link should be on the channel. If not, you can go to coolnamerpg.com and the link is there. But, we've had a lot of cool discussions on the Discord server, including some recent ones about combat. So let's take a look here. So as we look through this here, we talk a little bit about the purpose of the playtest. I want to remind folks that although we'll do surveys, you guys should feel fine about sending us information any way you want to. You can write to contact@aetaltis.com or contact@cnghrpg.com or info@cnghrpg.com. rpg.com and email us stuff. We will get that. You can send it to us that way. We will do surveys still, but you shouldn't hesitate to send us your thoughts and your ideas, especially if you've got like a big chunk of information. Like we had one person send us, I think it was Eric from Discord, sent us a actual play-by-play of their role-playing session. It was amazing. It was amazing to see, and it really helped us a lot. So as you know, we're doing core rules, and then we're going to be doing a book of rules modules. We're not really sure what we're going to call it yet, but it's not going to be basic and advanced anymore. We talked about that. We talked a little about surveys, but I'm going to skip through that and get into the guts of it. So nothing has really changed here in terms of the action dice and the action scores, okay? For this, it still works the same, where you add all of the positive things up on one side that help and all the negative things on the other side that are working against the character, right? Same way, either way. This is the terminology table, but getting to the mechanic, it's the same thing we had before. And then you look on the table to find your dice, which, you can see this here, find your action dice, and you roll those dice. And if you get higher than the difficulty score, equal to or higher than, you succeed. That's the whole system in a nutshell. That's how the system works all the time. So what does this mean for a GM? So let's say I'm a GM and I'm running the game. One of the things that I didn't put into this document is a GM section. I kind of feel like now I need to go back. But one of the things as a GM is, if I'm running this game, the way I do it is I basically call out an attribute. So I might say to people, let me jump to the attributes. I'll say, why don't you make a coordination check to do a limbo underneath that pole? Then people can go through and look at their MO, and someone might say, hey, look, I'm a thief. This is my thing, man. Can I add my thief MO? I'm like, yeah, sure, go for it. So they add their thief MO to their action score. But as a GM, I keep it simple and high level, because one of the things that we found is that people have been very cool and creative in coming up with their own ways to resolve the problems. Now, you might remember a while back, I talked about the superhero situation, right? Talked about the Avengers coming to a cliff. They don't all climb the cliff. Hulk jumps to the top of the cliff. The Thing, well, Thing's not an Avenger, but let's just say Thing crunches his hands in and climbs up the cliff, right? Iron Man flies to the top of the cliff. Captain America uses athletics. He's one of the few guys who actually uses some climbing skill to get up to the top of the cliff, right? Hawkeye fires an arrow up with a rope on it and pulls up on his little retractable line. And the Scarlet Witch uses magic. And so what we've done is we've created a situation where the characters are able to choose, the players are able to choose how they tackle the challenge. And it creates a lot of creativity. And we love that. We love seeing the creative solutions people are coming up with for their challenges that they're facing. Now, let me go back a little bit here for a second, though. And I'm going to go back to here. You can see we've managed to get the base core rule on a single sheet, on a single page. That was one of the things we wanted. Obviously this is still going to get some major rewrites before it goes out to the world so that other people can learn it. But for a play testing point of view, we've got it all into one page. Now, we've started adding a feedback needed section. When you see this is stuff we're especially interested in hearing your thoughts on. One of the things that came up previously was that whole +1 situation, right? The +1 modifier, where our dream is that every modifier is a +1. The reason for this is, as we talked about when we did early surveys, before this even started, we were doing really early surveys during the Kickstarter. And a thing that came up is that hunting for the rules for a specific modifier was time consuming, was difficult to remember, required lots of charts. And people were constantly fighting to say, like, oh, does darkness give a +2 or a -2, or how does that work? So we'd love to find a way to get this to work. So far, it seems to work pretty well, but it does require a certain amount, just like advantage and disadvantage in 5th edition, it requires a certain amount of acceptance that it's not going to be a simulation, that it's not going to be precise. And so I think it can work, but we still need to get more people trying this and more people using this. My hope is that with each release of the playtest, we're going to draw in more and more people to test it, especially as they see that there's more guts there they can really play with, right? I just want to stop for a second. Richard Lee Byers mentioned that it occurs to me that instead of advanced, options might be a good name. Yeah, getting options in there in some fashion would probably be great. cool options. We'll see, but that could definitely work. All right. One of the things that we've talked about, and I'm kind of going to be curious about what you'll say, is this idea of normal conditions. When you're determining the difficulty score, you'll see we managed to get this all into the one page here. When you're determining a difficulty score, one of the things that we say is that the base difficulty is how skilled you have to be to use this to accomplish this task most of the time. And that number represents normal conditions. And so one of the examples we give is surgery. A person doing a certain basic outpatient surgical procedure, right? How hard is that? Well, you got to be a skilled surgeon. So we'll say we'll give it a base difficulty score of 6. That assumes you've got a medical center and the right tools and probably a nurse assisting you or another doctor assisting you. That is all built into this idea of the base difficulty score. If you don't have those things, it becomes more difficult. This isn't really something that has come up in a lot of games in my experience. People don't generally talk about that aspect of the difficulties. And I think though that it's important because it sort of sets the stage for when do you add a modifier? Because if you don't know what normal is, when to add a modifier doesn't become very clear. So for example, if you say, well, it's a difficulty 6 for basic skilled, but what does that what if I have an operating room? It's like, well, we kind of assume you have an operating room, right? So it does require a certain amount of common sense. And I think one thing we're doing is we're putting a lot of trust and faith in all of you guys, right? In the players and in the game masters. I really think that we can safely let people make these calls, right? I think there's a sense sometimes that games have to give it all to you so that you can just look it up and do it. But if that's the case, then we don't really need a person. We can program that into a computer. The advantage of having human beings playing this is that you guys have the freedom and the creativity to build something that's completely your own. That's why I want to continue to put the trust and the faith in the players. And the same thing goes for, mod hunting. We talked a little bit about, if I go here to action, we talk a little bit in the action score section about mod hunters. I'm still haven't been sold on the fact that this is going to be a major problem. It'll be a problem for some groups, and those groups are going to need to address that within their group. And I think this falls into the same category as people using phones at the table or people bringing their laptops. At some point, it falls to the group to set their own standards. And one group might see it as mod hunting, but another group sees it as awesome creativity. And so, again, I really want to put the power in the hands of the players, the power in the hands of the GMs, so that they can make those calls for their group and decide what's right for them. And if we give a system that is hung on a strong framework, which I think we have now, we should be able to do that safely without running into problems where people run into things that unbalance things. So let me go back a little bit. So we talked about the core mechanic. We talk first about rolling the dice because that is the norm in this game, is rolling the dice for your actions, for your action checks. Now, open-ended rolls are still there. They were working really well. People really like them, and we're going to keep those. And just to go back to that, open-ended rolls, on the off chance that you've missed some of this stuff or haven't heard of that, that means that when you roll the highest number possible, you roll that die again and add it to your total. You can do that over and over again. We once had someone in a Earth Dawn game where they'd open and roll like 4 D6s in a row on 6, and it was amazing. We'll never forget that moment. Doesn't happen usually, but when it does, it's pretty amazing. But we do talk about skipping the roll, and we still think this is an important aspect of the game where you can simply compare the difficulty score to the action score, and whichever one is higher tells you whether or not you succeeded or failed, right? If the action score is equal to or higher than the difficulty, you can just call it and move on. Right? Now, we also point here that this isn't necessarily supposed to replace that GM fiat of saying, yeah, don't worry about it. No one has to roll. Of course you can do that. You should still have that. We still want that, right? We still want people to be able to step in and just, decide that they're just going to make the call on it. You shouldn't roll for something if it doesn't make the game cooler, right? And you shouldn't even compare scores if it doesn't make the game cooler. It's just here to offer people an option, and it actually works mathematically within the context of the game and still keeps the game balanced, which if we can pull that off, that's awesome. It's not a requirement necessarily, but we really do want to aim for that. All right, so moving on. Setting the difficulty score. So this is still in question, this bit here, right? This little bit about your skill needed. We're still not sure if this is going to work, right? We like this idea that instead of thinking of easy and hard or difficult or really difficult, instead we're talking about how much skill is needed. And the reason why I like this, and I still would like to find if we can make this work somehow, is that hard is completely subjective. At first level, what's hard is different than what is hard at 10th level, right? Hard isn't hard anymore, right? Now hard is easy when you're at a high enough level, when you've played enough or you're using a powerful enough character. I like the idea of having this scale that is static, that doesn't change with your advancement. Requiring a skilled practitioner at first level is the same as requiring a skilled practitioner at 10th level. It just fits for me. It works better for me in my mind. And so, I mean, I'm going to be looking to you guys to tell me whether it works at your table or whether you keep bumping into it. Because some people did. They're like, can we just say easy and very easy? And we can certainly do that. But yeah, we still want to try this out because I still think this is a great way to get our base difficulty score. All right, let's move on to, because I know you guys are eager to get to the combat piece as well. So we'll get there. Let's see here. Next up, finding the action score. Again, you notice we've got each of these core sections on a single page. That was one of our goals, is to set it up so you could just read that one page and pull out the information you need from a playtest perspective. We think that's really important. Finding the action score. Now, the underlying concept here, and because we're using the MOs still, and we'll get to that in a minute, we gave this calculation of adding your primary attribute score to an MO score, and that's the foundation for coming up with an action score. You can also add modifiers to it. You can also add things like specializations and focus, which we'll get to in a minute. But one thing that we've added in here is what we call the rule of one. Now, the rule of one says that you can only get a modifier or add a score from one thing of a certain type. So you wouldn't be able to add, say, 2 weapon attack bonuses to an attack check action score, right? You wouldn't be able to add 2 attributes scores there, right? The whole idea, because you need to, the whole idea here is that we don't want you just stacking up everything in the world into this action score, right? At some point, they just don't really help. There's a diminishing returns, right? And so we added this rule of one. I'll be interested to see if this is clear to folks and if this seems to work for people, if it makes sense. So I'm eager to see that in your games. Real quick here, a note here from Zero the Blade. Let's see what it says. Zero the Blade says, skill checks were boring at high levels because the bonuses you can get. Yeah, you know, and that's part of the reason why we're trying to keep the scale of this game a pretty tight scale, right? We don't want it to be off the charts. In fact, to be clear, the mission statement that everyone here came up with and all the folks gave us feedback on and we refined with everyone is about a game that is pretty down to earth, right? We're not talking Superman here. We're not talking the Justice League. We're talking the Defenders. Well, depends which group of Defenders you're thinking about. In my nerd hat on here, and it could be the Doctor Strange Defenders, not those guys, but we're talking like, you know, Luke Cage, we're talking Patsy, Hellcat, right? We're talking that group of Defenders, the more Nighthawk, down to earth folks. They could work within this context, but that's about as big as we want to get. We want James Bond, we want Lara Croft, we want Indiana Jones, only in a fantasy adventure world, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at here. All right. So anyway, back to this rule of one. Let's move on to the primary attributes. So at this point, we've got 3 different groups of primary attributes. We've got the physical attributes, the mental attributes, and the what we're calling for now instinctive attributes. Now, there's a reason for this, and this is going to come up later when we talk about vitality, that one of our underlying goals in the game is to have exciting encounters of all different types. We don't just want the only encounters that matter from a mechanical, from a game progress point of view to be the combats. We want to be able to have exploration that's awesome. We want to be able to have world building that's awesome. We want to be able to have emotional moments that are awesome and have cool mechanics behind them where you can actually get into the game and play that moment, not just role play it. Not that the role playing part isn't vital, it is, but we want people to be able to get in there and play it, because it kind of comes back to this. Not everyone is awesome at the role playing part. They want to, but it's not necessarily their thing. And by giving people a way to play those scenes out, we make it more accessible to everyone at the table, not just that one person who's, like a native actor, right? It's like in their blood and they come out there and start role playing. And the other person's like, oh, it's just not me. And I miss out on that. We don't want that to happen. So we've got these grouping of attributes and we've grouped them very purposefully. And we start with coordination, which we talked about these last week. So I'm not going to go into big detail. They're also pretty straightforward. And then we get down here to what the typical attribute scores are. And I think that this is pretty important because, at this point, what we're saying is that the attribute scores for your character will probably be somewhere between a 1 and a 5. A 1, if you're like super, I don't know if deficient is the word, you're just not strong in an area. I mean, you could have like a fairy character that had a really low score, up to a 5. Now, it is possible to have a 0. We talked about that, but I'm not going to deal with that in the play test because it's not really something that we're dealing with at this point in the play test. Okay. We have a starting attribute spread. I'm going to just come right out and say that I stole the balance of the spread from other games because I didn't want to come up with all the math on my own on what a good balance is. And so this spread where you can have apply 4 2s, 3 3s, and 2 4s is really drawn straight from other systems that do a very similar system, and it works really well in those. So we just balance it against those, right? So this makes it very easy to make your starting character. At some point, we'll have a rolling method because I like to roll for my stats, but that's going to be an option. And then we explain here how to do it. But we also start talking about secondary attributes. Now, these are brand new. It's not stuff that you guys have seen before. So the first of these is vitality. Vitality is a general term for your overall health and ability to keep going when faced with physical hardship. Now, this isn't just wounds and injuries. This is also your fatigue. This is also your energy that you've got. This is a mix of things. It's wounds, it's scratches, it's bruises, it's all of those things are impacted or impact your vitality, right? When you hit 0 vitality, you are not dead. That is not the way that this is set up, that you're dead when you hit 0 vitality. When you hit 0 vitality, you are simply stunned, okay? You're stunned and prone. Now, the idea here is that we wanted a system that allows someone else to run up and help get you back on your feet and back into the fight, and yet still have that threat that you could be taken down. And we'll get to a little bit more about where death comes into this. But the whole idea is that during the game, and we'll talk about this more later, there's ways within the combat round to increase your vitality again very easily. So you have this sort of this dynamic that I think is a lot of fun to play. I've just found, at least when we've been doing it. All right, so going through here, I do want to mention that eventually we're going to have rules for mental and instinctive vitality. Probably as a module, because at the core game level, most people probably don't need this or want it. But the whole idea is that, for example, mental vitality could come into play if you're doing like a Cthulian adventure, right? Or instinctive vitality could come into play if you were doing something where mana is impacting someone's very soul type of situation, right? So these are the things where these can come into play, and it gives us a lot of freedom. Now, remember, one of our big things here is we want to give you guys building blocks to build cool stuff. Here, you've got a bunch of dials that generally don't really exist in games. And so you can twist and turn these dials and create the things that you want to create. Zero the Blade just said a break mechanic in a way. Yeah, and I'll get to it in just a second. It's because that's exactly how it's set up. So anyway, that's the whole idea here. One thing I do want to mention is that vitality could be impacted by things like your lineage, right? If we are playing some like a playable troll, you probably have more vitality than just these 3 scores added together, because that's where you get the vitality score from. So this character would have a vitality of 8. Troll might have something more than that, right? One other thing I did want to mention is that I also like the way that vitality plays out, where it adds all 3 of these together, because it allows you to play that sort of thin marathon runner that still can take a beating and keep going, right? But they don't have to be just, you don't always have to be the big bulky guy in order to stand up to a fight. And so that's one of the things we wanted to shoot for as well. So you could create the sort of character you want and not have to say, and because I didn't take a high enough toughness score, my guy's going to die in the first 10 minutes. So again, gives you those options. We also have wound threshold. I'm going to be getting to that shortly as well. And I'm not going to talk about it here necessarily, but we will get to it some more in the combat section. First, though, let's talk a little bit about MOs. MOs are still in the game. People really liked these. They are also quite different from most other games. And that's one of the things that we like about it, and one of the things that people seem to like about it. It's a really different sort of way to approach your character and character creation. What's more is I was loving how many people came up with their own MOs. Again, we want to create a system that's built to mod, right? We want it to be moddable from day one, and we want it to not only be moddable, but to support it in a really positive way. And so MOs do that because it allows you to create all sorts of cool MOs. Now, within the MO, you can actually have, and probably the easiest thing is to show you one here. Let me go down to this here. Let's look at athlete. You could spend points in athlete, but then you could actually spend points in a focus, which means you're focusing your training. Now, this is a focus is going to be cheaper to buy than a MO, right? So let's say I'm an athlete and I want to focus on endurance. And what's more, I'm an endurance runner. That's my thing. Now, I don't know what game that would come into play where being an endurance runner is like the big thing. I mean, I guess if you were trying to, run and warn that the Persians were coming or something, but the idea here is that you can focus in, and every character can be different. So every athlete won't be the same. Every warrior won't be the same. Everyone will be a little bit different. What is more, we are encouraging the players and the GMs to come up with some of their own. So let's say you're looking at athlete, you might come up with something totally different that we hadn't thought of. That would be a great focus. And you might come up with some specializations underneath there that would be awesome. So we want to say to you guys, these are suggested focuses and specializations. You should expand them. Now, one of the questions that will come up is, yeah, but won't people use this as a way to not have to spend points on MOs? I don't think that's going to happen. And here's why. Because we added in a rule of thumb that should help to avoid that. And the rule of thumb is this. Anytime you're coming up with a new focus or specialization, you should ask yourself this. All, insert MO name. Let me zoom in on it a little bit. Here you go. All, insert the MO name, can insert the focus or specialization. So here's the example. Jeff wants to add a spellcasting focus to his thief MO. Now the GM looks at this and goes, you want to add spellcasting? I mean, why don't you just take the wizard MO? He goes, because it's cheaper to buy a spellcasting focus. And the GM says, well, let's see how this works. All thieves can cast spells. Does that make sense within the context of the world? No. All thieves don't cast spells. Some thieves do, but most thieves don't. And if all thieves don't cast spells, then it kind of doesn't work as a focus or a specialization. And as a result, the GM is like, nah, you know what? You got to take the wizard MO, right? And so it's a good way to start looking at this, because if you look at some of these, like athlete, all athletes can do acrobatics. They might not all be good at it, but most athletes can pull off a certain level of acrobatics, right? And that's sort of the idea here, is that if it makes sense that most characters that type could even a little bit do the thing, then it can work as a focus or a specialization. And so again, it lets you build this out however you want to build it out, so you have the character you want to play. All right, so going back to this. We also put in the, I don't know why this is here. It's in the wrong place. I'm gonna have to fix that. But the MOs and equipment, we still don't have an equipment list. So you're still going to do that whole thing where you roll to see if maybe your character has it. I know some people are going to love this and keep doing it, and that's fine. But it's just a way to figure out if your character has the gear that they want to have, if they happen to be carrying it with them, see if they thought about it. And in that, you're making an intellect check or a mind check to go in there and sort of see whether you have the gear. But anyway, going on from here, creating new MOs, creating new focuses and specializations. Again, I hope people do make up their MOs. I could see some MOs like Knight, for example, instead of Warrior, where instead of all the different warrior reserves, they spread out all the weapons and defense and things. You might have a focused set of Knight's weapons. You might have a focused set of martial skills for the battlefield. You might have a riding focus for the Knight. So I hope people will come up with some things like that. I think you'll be able to do some cool things. And by the way, I'm just going to point out again the amazing art that Russell Marks is doing. This is one of the ones that's going to come with the game when we give it to everyone. And so you'll be able to use this image and the others in your game yourself, which is very, very cool. And I've got more, but we're not going to show that today. All right, so let's take a look at the MOs that we kept here and that we used. First, we used the athlete. An athlete represents a person who just works out their body. Now, look, I know a warrior is a very physical person, but they're not necessarily someone who focuses on lifting weights or quickly climbing or running or using their agility to do acrobatics. It's not necessarily their thing, right? So I wanted a special area. So you might be a warrior athlete, which is a very physical warrior, but you could also be a thief athlete, which is a thief who also has learned a lot of physical tricks along the way as well. And that's kind of how I like that you can sort of build these together to create the sort of character you want. We've got Bard, which is sort of a face of the group, right? And that's where you find a lot of your leadership and persuasion and performance abilities. We've got Cleric, of course, and this is where you get into some of your clerical spell casting and healing. We don't have the spell casting rules in here yet, but everyone did a pretty good job of coming up with something on the fly. So for now, you're going to keep doing that until we get down to the nitty gritty of spells. And then we've got Scholar, and this is where you get into your sciences and your history and your engineering and your professional skills like cartography and law. Survivalists, this is your living in the outdoors, finding water, finding shelter, that sort of thing. On from there, we get to our thief, which is where your deception and larceny. Lorona, who is actually here or was here tonight, I don't know if they're still around, but a bunch of these came from the original skill wheel that Lorona gave to us on Discord. And so thank you again. It helped to inspire a lot of these groupings. Tradesperson, this is where you got your carpentry and your lumbering. Look, I know you're saying to yourself, why do I want to be a tradesperson in a game? Trust me, someone will. People like to have these sorts of abilities and be that character. It's kind of their thing, right? Oh, Lorona's here. Hey, Lorona. Warrior, of course, this is where you get into your weapons, and then wizard. Now, you might be thinking, do I have to take warrior to use weapons? No. One of the things we talk about early on, I think it's in the next section here, is that there's certain weapons that everyone knows how to use. Fist, feet, clubs, bow. You know, in the fantasy world that our characters live in, they can use all of these sorts of things, daggers, you know. So your MO can always be added if you're using one of those weapons. Okay, so you don't have to take warrior to be able to use them. What warrior does, though, and this is where the difference comes in, warrior allows you to focus and specialize. Not every MO does, because combat isn't their focus or their specialization. Combat, they do it, and they have to be able to do it, but it's not about combat. That's not what they're about. A cleric fights, but they're necessarily about combat. Now, what we did do is for cleric, give them the defense focus, and as a suggestion with block, dodge, and parry. The idea being that they defend people against the forces of evil. They have to fight them, but more of the time they're holding the line so that other people can come in and do the front facing fighting, right? Getting alliteration here. So as we look through it, let me go back here. Yep, there we go. So yeah, everybody can fight. right? And so you don't need warrior to fight. In addition, the other thing is that you don't need to take bard if you want to haggle. Everyone can try to haggle. It's just that bard happens to have a focus in haggling. Another example would be intimidate. So bard has intimidate, right? Now, GM might be sitting there and then the bard says, I want to intimidate them. They're like, well, yeah, that's your thing, man. You scare people. But what about the warrior? Warrior can be pretty intimidating. Well, yeah, the GM goes, you should definitely add your warrior MO if you're on the battlefield and you're trying to frighten someone with your battle prowess. And they go, well, look, I'm a specialist with a long blade. Can I add my melee specialist? Because I'm going to basically make it really clear to them if they take one step towards me, I'm going to cut them up like a Ginsu steak knife. And that's a very cool intimidation role. Now, if that warrior was sitting in at a noble's party and wants to subtly intimidate this person and make clear that bad things will happen if they don't go along with it, that warrior is going to be out of their element. As a GM, I'm going to be like, yeah, unless you draw your sword and really make a scene, I'm not going to have you use your MO for intimidate. That doesn't make sense. Now, the thief might. The bard, absolutely. So again, it's all about the setting, the moment, the context. It's up to the GM and the players. I trust the GM and the players to make those calls. I think that it can be a lot of fun for folks when they start doing that and telling their story. All right, so now to the part that everyone's been waiting for, probably, the combat discussion. Okay, so this needs some playtesting, right? I've told you before, I'm giving this stuff to you guys before we've even done all the playtesting we would normally do, just getting it into your hands so you can start playing it. This is player facing is what we've decided to go with for now. It doesn't mean it's the only system we'll have or the only system we'll test. We're going to test both sides rolling. We're going to test opposed rolls, a single opposed roll on each side, and that determines who gets injured. Is another thing I want to test. We'll play around with some of these, but a lot of folks really love the player facing concept, and that's why we went with that for this. There are rounds and turns. A round is everyone goes once. A turn is your turn to go. I know that sometimes these get swapped around in different games, right? And so it gets a little confusing sometimes, but just remember that round goes around the table and turn, it's your turn. We also have movement in here. And what we say is that we don't have movement. This is theater of the mind for this play test. You're welcome to do some movement if you feel like it. And if you come up with something cool, make sure to tell us, but we're not really focusing on that. So now let's talk about what you can do during a combat round. The number of actions per round you can do, we've kept it to a minor action and a major action. A minor action is like drawing your sword, throwing a door open, guzzling a potion, quick things like that. A major action is things like making an attack, casting a spell, that sort of thing. Now, a good rule of thumb that we gave is if you're making a roll, it's a major action. If you're not, it's probably a minor action. So that's a good way to split it up. And for now, for us to use, I'm sure we'll solidify this more so as we go along and people discover what works and doesn't. Initiative is a coordination check. Now, warriors get to add their MO score to this and others don't. I'll be interested to see what you guys think of that and how that works for you. The idea here is that a warrior is made for combat and this is their moment, right? This is their shtick. So let's not cheat them out of that when this is their focus in the game. Now, I did put in an option where you can change your initiative. Instead of taking an action, you could re-roll your initiative score, which is basically positioning yourself better so that the next round you'll go first from then on, right? Now, it might not work. You might roll lower and then you're stuck with that on the next round, right? But it's just an opportunity to sort of shift your position. Now, NPCs and monsters, they have a set initiative score. Again, we're trying to make this very player facing. We're trying to eliminate the extra rolls at the table that you're trying to keep track of. I don't know how you guys are going to like this, but I'm interested to see how people like it at the table. But again, there's no rolling. It just says initiative and it has a number, and that is their initiative. Only the players roll for initiative. Now, other actions you can do, you could take a ready, and a ready is like most games where you prepare, but you have to name what is going to happen and what you're going to do. And if what you are waiting for doesn't happen, then you lose the turn. You don't get to do anything. If what you want to do turns out not to be what you want to do, then you just have to toss the turn. Again, ready allows you to interrupt someone, but it has to be specific. And then there's delay, which again, like most games, delay allows you to wait till later in the round to go. You could even wait till next round to go. Maybe you want to go, say, at the start of the round. Neither of these change your initiative, but delay, you go after everyone else on the initiative score, whereas ready, you can interrupt them. That's the whole difference, start to finish. So let's talk about attacking. Attacking the enemy. When you're attacking, attacks ranged or melee are a coordination check, action check. A coordination action check is the foundation. So you're adding your coordination score to your MO score. And here's where we talk a little bit about how fists, feet, daggers, bows, and clubs. Everyone knows how to use them. You don't need to take warrior to be able to add your MO for those. This also works if there are, say, we note that if you have something that you think is the right sort of weapon for your character, the GM should probably let you add your MO. So a cleric with a mace, for example, or a thief with a hand crossbow, the GM should totally let you add your MO for that. Of course, this is like your thing, right? Or a staff attack with a wizard, right? So again, we're looking to folks, we're trusting folks to make these calls as they need to. And the thing is that you might say like, oh, if we have to like work this out every time, but you don't, right? You just work it out once. After that, everybody knows. You always get your MO with the mace. You write it on your character sheet, so you don't have to figure it out every time. It's all right there. All right, so let's get on here with talking a little bit about damage and what happens when you hit. Well, of course, there's focuses and specializations, and keeping in mind that your total action score is your attribute plus your MO. And if one of your focuses applies, like let's say you're making a melee attack and you're a warrior and you have melee focus, you add your focus and then you add your specialization. So each one gets added on. We did this because we didn't want one of those scenarios where you're like, wait, do I use my focus score or do I use my MO score? No, you use them all. You add them all together. Just keep them all added together. It makes it easy. You don't have to try to figure it out every single time. And so that way the whole system sort of works in terms of making it simple to know what to do. You don't have to try to figure out whether it's different than it is at other times in the game. We wanted that consistency in place. Now, the attack difficulty score, every monster NPC will have a defense score. That defense score is your difficulty. Now, there could be modifiers, rain, slick ground, things like that get added to that difficulty score. And there might be things that benefit you, like if you have the high ground, apparently you get plus 100 or something, right? And so you have your difficulty score and your action score, and in the end, you have this set score and you roll, and if you get equal to or higher than that, you've hit. And how much damage do you do? Simple. How much did you make it by? That's how much damage you do. Now, if you're using a melee weapon, you add your strength score to that. If the weapon has a damage score, which some weapons do, you add the damage score to that. So you could do a decent amount of damage in a single hit, depending on the weapon and how strong you are, right? Now, the NPC and monster attacks. Let's take a look at that. Now, I should note that NPCs and monsters, when they hit 0 vitality, they're done. We don't worry about wounds. We don't worry about knocking them out, unless, of course, you try to knock them out, which you can do, non-lethal damage. We'll talk about that. But yeah, we can just knock the monster out. That's fine. They're out of the game. We don't need to worry about them anymore. NPC and monster attacks. Now, because this is player facing, when the monster attacks your character, the monster is not making a roll to hit you. Instead, you're making a defensive roll to not get hit. And so there's a few different ways that you can do this. Now, first off, MOs and focuses and specializations might apply again, right? Your MO most likely applies because your character has learned to fight so you can survive, because fantasy worlds are crazy dangerous, it seems like. So everyone should have at least some fighting skill, especially characters that decide to become adventurers. And you can add your focuses and your specializations. Now, one thing to add about focuses and specializations for the characters that can do it, warrior and cleric at this point, but maybe you'll make one that has it as well. Defense always applies. But if you specialize in, say, block, you got to have a shield. Otherwise, you can't block. If you specialize in parry, you need to be holding a weapon that you know how to use. Or if you try to specialize in dodge, you need to have 5 feet open all the way around you, except for where your opponent is, of course. So that's how those specializations, when they come into play. And so if you wanted to create a really strong shield fighter, it would mean that every time that you're making your defense roll, you're making a block roll to try to block the attack with your shield as you and block, attack and block as you go through. And you've got a bonus to your block attacks. You might even make a super focused character that is specialized in focus in melee, specialized in long swords, focus in defense, specialize in shield. And that's their thing. Now, they lose their shield or their sword, they're in a lot of trouble, right? They're not going to be as effective anymore. But you could do it if that's what you wanted to do. It'd be very cool. All right, so let's go on from there. NPCs are attacking. The difficulty score for this, again, it's the attack score for the creature. Every creature's got an attack score. That's your difficulty if you're trying to defend against them. Pretty much straightforward stuff. Taking damage, the amount you miss by, if you miss, is how much damage you take. Now, most monsters and NPCs have a damage score as well for their different types of attacks. They'll add that to it. So let's say you miss by 2, that means you're taking 2 points of damage plus whatever their damage bonus is as you're going through with it, okay? Now, armor does exist. Right now, we're saying armor should be around 1 to 3, and a shield generally adds 1 point to your armor score in general. With armor, all it does is subtract from the damage, right? So if you do 4 damage, if you're wearing 1 armor, you only take 3. Now, you'll remember, right now, we're dealing with some pretty small numbers, right? Because most characters, you're going to have like 6, 8, maybe vitality. We're going to have to see how this plays out, right? Because it seems to be working for us, but I'm a little nervous about what happens when everyone starts really rolling a lot of dice to see where this goes, right? But the idea here is this. Remember how I talked about vitality is not your health, right? It's not your hit points. In a game, most games, your health, you hit 0 and you're dead. That's not how vitality works here. And so we're going to be talking about that in a second. Before I do, I just want to touch on non-lethal damage. If you want to do non-lethal damage to an NPC or monster, it's +1 to the difficulty score. Just means that you're trying not to kill them in a deadly combat, right? Fight for your life. So let's talk about vitality. Vitality can be recovered in a relatively simple way. You take a recovery action. All you got to do is take a recovery action and you make a toughness score, a toughness action check. That's it. You roll that and you get that many points back up to your maximum. What this does, and this is where, Zero the Blade was talking about a break mechanic. What this does is it creates this motion in the combat. It creates this flow in the combat where people fight, and then they hold back for a minute, catch their breath, fight, and then hold back and catch their breath. And it creates this really cool dynamic that fits really well with what you see in a down-to-earth level adventure story, where the characters are going back and forth. The other advantage to it is this. Look, I go up, fight, and I fall back, and my friend moves up to cover me. And then they fight while I'm catching my breath. And then we move up, and we both come up together. You can have this going on, and it's very fun, and it's not particularly complicated, right? It's pretty straightforward. Now, there's another option. You'll notice that there's some wording here that I have to correct still. So please don't assume this is the final where I'm going to have to fix this up tonight before I send this out tomorrow. But unconscious, if you hit 0 vitality, you're stunned and down on the ground. There's a reason we did this, because there were a couple times where things got a little bit silly, where characters were getting knocked out and then wake up again, then knocked out, then wake up again. It didn't create the vibe we were looking for. So what we ended up doing is this idea that you're stunned and prone. So when you hit 0, I tell you, fall back, and you're just like, you're out of it. You don't know what to do. You can't quite get to your feet. When that happens, someone can run up and give you first aid. And that is, again, this is an action check. And the base DS for that is 0, but other modifiers may come into play, like the orc standing over you, but they can get you back on your feet. And it creates this thing where the support team is as vital to the game as the warriors themselves. So the person who runs up and gets you back on your feet or does a quick first aid check on you during your rest action, like if you rest and they run up and do first aid, you could be back up to full vitality and fighting again and get right back into the combat. And it creates a very, very fun dynamic as we go through with it, right? Now, wounds. You can still die. And that's important because we all know that, it's if there's not a threat of being horribly maimed and killed in the game, it doesn't meet that idea that there are these sort of wounds that could linger around and cause you trouble. So here's how wounds work. Your wound threshold is equal to your toughness. So if your toughness is a 2, that means anytime you take 2 or more points of damage, you suffer a wound. The severity of that wound is dependent on how many times over your wound threshold you are. So if you take 2 points of damage, you take a wound severity 1. If your toughness is 2 and you take 4 points of damage, your wound severity is 2. So what does this wound severity mean? The wound severity is added to the difficulty score of everything you do. So if you have 3 wounds of 1 each, you're going to have +3 to all your difficulty scores. Now, we've talked about the dreaded spiral of death that comes with a wound score. You can have your wound treated. It doesn't go away, but you can treat it on the battlefield, and then you could ignore the effect of that wound. It's still there, and you're still going to have to heal it, but you can ignore the effect temporarily. It no longer adds to your difficulty score. So you fall back, and the cleric reaches over and does a spell to treat your wounds, and now your wounds are no longer causing you a disadvantage on the battlefield. So that's how that can work, where you can get these wounds and you can start piling up wounds. There is a catch, though. There is a catch. When you take a wound, you need to make a toughness check against the total of all your wound severities. If you fail it, you're dying. So each wound that you take, you risk that being the one that takes you out. This has been pretty fun because it creates this sort of unknowable moment that really fits with reality, right? We've seen people who take ridiculous amounts of damage in real life and somehow keep moving and keep fighting and keep going, right? And other people who take one injury and then they're gone, and that's it. So that's how this works, is it creates this sort of unknowable moment where you have to make this roll to see if you can survive the wound that you've just taken. If you do, great, you're good. Just keep fighting, get your vitality back up, get back in there. If not, you're dying and someone needs to stabilize you. So again, it's just another action check, an intellect action check. If you've got healing focus, you could add that. If you got medicine or first aid, you could add that. If you have a really cool first aid kit, you could add that score for that. All that gets added to the action score to roll to stabilize the character. And so, again, I'm not going to go into the exact mechanics of it here because you guys will be able to see it. And we're running a little bit low on time. But that's the gist of how the death and dying works within the game. Now, you'll see that this system gives you a lot of ways to not die. That's on purpose. If you think again about the sort of adventures and stories that we're basing this on, Conan, John McClane from Die Hard, all of these sorts of characters, if you think about that, there is this sort of give and take where they get a horrible wound, but then they bandage it up. And it's not till later that someone goes, "Oh my God, you've been horribly shot." And you're like, "Yeah, I'm dying now. So, sorry guys." Those are the sorts of moments that we want to create. And we want it to have that sort of feel, that ebb and flow where you're back on your feet and fighting. And then you're just on the very edge before you get back into it. And so that's what this does for us. Now, healing wounds takes a long time. Each week, you have to make a roll to see if you manage to heal your wounds. And if you do, all your wounds severity is reduced by 1. When it reduces to 0, the wound is healed. Will there be rules for wounds being permanent? Sure, but it'll probably be a module because not everybody wants to do that, right? But again, the wounds are the real damage. That's where the sword pierces your gut. That's where the arrow, you get an arrow in the knee, right? That's where the real damage comes in. So that's what wounds represent, as your real injuries, whereas vitality is just the stuff that you're giving all you've got. I can see vitality, by the way, being something that you could potentially spend to benefit you, but then you risk being knocked down if you get too close to the edge. So it ends up being one of these sort of risk-taking moments where you can decide whether it's helpful or not to get the extra bonus at the cost of vitality. So something that we can do with it. All right. The last thing I want to show you, that's actually the end of the rules that I want to show you. These are the rules that we're going to be sending out to you. We have some more of the Forbidden Gate, a different adventure from Aetaltis that I'm converting over, that we'll be sending out to use as a tool as you guys are playing through this, just so you can test out some different things like climbing and fighting and swinging and searching and all of that sort of stuff as well. But of course, you can make up your own stuff along the way. Not a problem if you want to do that. But I do want to show you one thing. I did promise you of a rules module, which unfortunately is a little hard to read here. But for a traditional crunchy skill system, for the folks who are into that sort of thing, because I know there are people, you can swap out. We're going to give you the first of ever of the rules modules, this crunchy skill tree in place of the MO, focus, and specialization. Now, note something. It's still almost the same system. We've got the top level, which are your core skills, which could effectively equate to an MO. You've got your focuses, which are just like focuses in an MO, and you've got your specializations. The idea being that this allows you to play with a standard skill set where you develop skills and you learn different trees and you can pick up whichever thing you want to pick up and sort of build your character there. And that, you know, when you want to do intimidate, it always has to come from the right area of the skill tree, right? But it's a module. And so we're going to have that for folks because we know right now that some folks are not going to be into the MO thing. And so this is our first chance to sort of experiment with that and see how it works. And again, Lorona, I had to go out and learn how to create these sunburst pie charts because I saw the one that you made and I was like, okay, we got to be able to do that. And so I based it off that with some changes and things, and we fleshed it out in a few different ways. But I'm looking forward to sharing that with everyone. So that is my run through of the playtest rules. We are actually truly, definitely sending those out tomorrow for everyone to download. We're getting some read throughs right now just to clean some stuff up. I have to clean up a few spots where it says unconscious, where we switched it to stunned, so we can fix that. But we're going to be playing some games, guys. We're going to be playing some cool name. And I'm hoping we can do some actual play next week. So don't hold me to it, but I'm hoping we can pull that off. And so next week we'll get some actual play in. You guys can see how the game plays out. In the meantime, if you have any other questions, reach out, let us know. Join us on Discord, join us on Facebook. All of this stuff is there. I think that this is turning out to be amazing. The thing I love is that it is so moddable. It's so easy to make stuff for this game that I'm sitting here just having a blast building stuff. I feel like it's like the Minecraft of role-playing games. If we pull that off, I'll just be completely thrilled. And so I'm looking forward to your feedback to help us to make that happen. In the meantime, enjoy your own home games. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope that you keep playing some cool names, and I'll be posting that stuff very soon. Watch for it tomorrow on Facebook and on Discord. We'll send it out to folks. I'll also do an email to our newsletter and the Kickstarter. So it's going to be all over the place tomorrow. So go ahead and look for that. Good night, folks. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you later.